This video is sponsored by Iniba.com, a new gaming marketplace bringing you the hottest deals with up to 70% discount. Get cheap workout products as well as other games. Click on the link below and use code DORON to get 3% off. Hello guys, this is Doron's Movies, and today I will be talking about Quel'Thalas and what would have happened had Arthas never conquered it, covering the lore and alternate history speculations. So without further ado, let's get into the lore. Not that long ago, Arthas, together with his Scourge, had conquered Lordaeron and invaded the kingdom of Quel'Thalas. They ravaged the towns and Silvermoon, took over the Sunwell, while at the same time wiping out 90% of the High Elven population. Essentially, he had completely obliterated the High Elven kingdom, and it hasn't recovered from this up to this day. But what would the lore be like if Arthas didn't invade Quel'Thalas or had failed? Well, there are two drastically different scenarios. First is that Arthas never even attempted to take Quel'Thalas and instead just sailed for Northrend. The second one is that he did attack the Elven Kingdom but was actually defeated. In the case of both, it is worth noting that Quel'Thalas was incredibly powerful, being one of the most influential forces on Azeroth at the time. A lot stronger than the Blood Elven Kingdom that we have today. So, in the case of Arthas never invading the elves, well, there are two reasons for the war. First was that Quel'Thuzad was a crucial part of this mission to succeed the Lich King, as well as the Legion one, and the Sunwell was the only available power to resurrect him. Seeing that the Sunwell was deep in Elven territory, war was the only option. Now, how much the resurrection holds up in the current lore, I don't really know, because it does seem a bit overkill to use essentially a small well of eternity to resurrect one Lich that isn't even that powerful, and I'm guessing by today's lore there would be another source of power, maybe something with Dalaran or something around there, maybe using the ley lines. So outside of the Sunwell, the second reason is actual strategy. Quel'Thalas is located just above Lordaeron, and had it been left untouched, they would have easily cleared the Scourge and reconquered the human kingdom. This would eliminate the undead presence in the eastern kingdoms and would definitely interfere with Ner'zhul's mission. So, leaving a very powerful enemy at the top of your border that was previously an ally of the kingdom you just conquered doesn't seem like that good of an idea. Also, most of those elves that Arthas killed had been raised, so they bolstered the Scourge and made it accomplish what it did in the future. Without those reinforcements, he might not have had the power to reach the Frozen Throne, as it was a close call as it is. However, if Quel'Thalas was left untouched, the world would definitely be entirely different. Let's say Arthas became the Lich King, still Lordaeron would have been rebuilt, or it would have been just taken by the elves. In turn, they would grow a lot more powerful, and the Burning Legion invasion might have been stopped, or would have been defeated in a quicker manner, as well as the Northern campaign against Arthas. The Forsaken would never have been created, Sylvanas would still be an elf, and most of the current events wouldn't have occurred. The entirety of the Eastern Kingdoms would most likely be a part of the alliance with King Anasterion, and the Horde wouldn't have gotten the powerful ally, the Forsaken. Also, most likely none of the other conflicts would have happened, especially Battle for Azeroth, and we most likely would have been a lot more united without a character like Sylvanas poisoning the well as the undead. The Burning Crusade would not be the same, and almost every other expansion would be changed in one way or the other. Now, in terms of the second option, and that is that Arthas did invade the Elven Kingdom, but was actually defeated. This might seem ridiculous to some people, but there was actually a very large possibility that the Scourge could have been defeated. The only reason the undead just completely steamrolled the elves was because there was a traitor that worked in the background and gave Arthas more effective ways to attack and to bypass the very powerful walls and magic protections. At the same time, the High Elves were incredibly powerful, and Silvermoon was never conquered in 7,000 years, even though the Horde invaded the Elven Kingdom in the past, as well as the Amani. The High Elves were also caught unprepared, and the unified defense was far too late. While in the actual history, the Highland population was almost entirely destroyed, that was mainly because the cities and the defenses were breached, and almost all of the civilians were slaughtered thereafter. Still, even with such catastrophic results, the Scourge did suffer moderate losses, and one of the main reasons they even managed to continue forward was because they had resurrected fallen elves to continue the offensive. Had the elves been more prepared and secured, there was a big chance that they could have kept the undead at bay and ultimately killed Arthas. Now, this would be a massive game changer and would completely redefine the lore as we know it. The results would be similar as with the previous examples of Lordaeron being rebuilt and the Alliance taking over, but with Arthas dead, much would change. Ner'zhul would most likely have succumbed to Illidan and would have been destroyed. In turn, there would be no Wrath of the Lich King, no Forsaken, and the undead would most likely have been eliminated. The entire "there must always be a Lich King" is a thing because Arthas had essentially murdered half of the Eastern Kingdom and then raised a ton of monstrosities that were almost impossible to wipe out later on. However, if he was defeated, this would have never occurred. The two factions would more or less be stuck on their own continents, and most likely the battle for Azeroth would have never occurred, or it would be in a completely different fashion. We would possibly be more united in the face of big threats such as the Burning Legion and the Void. So, the conclusion is that the invasion of Quel'Thalas was actually a massive turning point in the lore, and while we know what had happened, it was actually a very close call, and had the Scourge failed to accomplish their goals, the world of Azeroth would have been a lot different today. It is hard to even put up a list of events since then, as everything has been influenced by this war in one way or the other. Still, Quel'Thalas surviving the offensive would make for a very interesting alternate universe. Thank you for watching. Do check out who is the next war chief of the Horde by clicking on the screen, and also check out the second channel, Doran's Academy, for videos on real world history and science. See you next time.